I'm gonna impress master with a background drawing. Yeah, look.
What the fuck is this? It's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. Come with me, child. I'll show you how to draw backgrounds. Come.
Okay, I'll come with you.
Alright, backgrounds. So drawing backgrounds and environments is super easy. The only thing you gotta remember is perspective, because perspective is most essential when drawing backgrounds, and not only backgrounds but also characters, because everything that you see around us is in perspective. Alright, so what is perspective? Perspective in art usually refers to the representation of three-dimensional objects or spaces in two-dimensional artworks. Now, there are two types of perspective. One is linear perspective and the other one is atmospheric perspective. Linear perspective is often used in mathematics, physics, and geometry. So linear perspective represents how we turn three-dimensional objects on two-dimensional plane. So linear perspective consists of 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, 4 and 5 points, and isometric perspective. Now, atmospheric perspective. Atmospheric perspective means that the objects that are farther away from you simply just fade away and they appear in less detail because of the air or atmosphere that covers the earth. So here in this example, the mountains far away from the camera or the viewer appear to be faded away or covered by a layer of fog because of the atmosphere. They also have less detail on them. So here in this alley also, as you can see, the far away area of the alley is covered in fog. So here in this cityscape, you can see the faraway buildings are covered in fog or atmosphere and also appear to be less detailed because of that, as compared to the buildings which are closer to the viewer. Alright, moving on to one-point perspective. So one-point perspective has one vanishing point, as the name suggests, a horizon line, and all of these lines converge into that vanishing point. And whatever you see above the horizon line appears as if you're seeing that object from below, and whatever you see below the horizon line appears as if you are seeing that object from above. So a good exercise would be to draw various different primitives or objects or simple shapes so that you can get an idea of how the one-point perspective works. Okay, so the next step would be to draw a scene from your memory or maybe take a reference. I drew this from memory. It's a simple railroad scene. You can just pull out a reference and draw whatever. So if you follow the perspective guidelines, everything should fall in place. You can of course warp some object here and there to break the stiff nature of perspective.
By the way, subscribe and join the Discord and Patreon.
Okay, moving on to two-point perspective. Two-point perspective, as the name suggests, has 2 points. So everything that you draw in two-point perspective converges towards those 2 points. And the same rules apply as the one-point perspective. So everything that you draw above the horizon line appears as if you're looking at it from below, and everything that you draw below the horizon line appears as if you're looking at that object from above. So, and as usual, it is essential to draw all these simple objects and primitives so that you can get a feel for that perspective. And the next step would be to create a scene out of your memory, or just take a reference and copy that reference as it is. I literally did this from memory, so it might be kind of rough on the edges, So but that's fine, because the most important thing is to get an understanding of how the perspective works. It helps in drawing some greenery or some trees and bushes, so that your scene has some life in it, rather than only just drawing buildings and all those man-made objects. Okay, so I wanted to cover this special type of two-point perspective, which is called as the vertical two-point perspective. So instead of drawing the 2 points horizontally, you draw them vertically, so that it gives you the depth or the illusion of a 3-point, but it only works if the horizontal lines are parallel. And in the second example, the 2-point is also combined with the 1-point perspective as it appears in the example. I really like this perspective because it's a quick and dirty way to get the feel of the 3-point perspective. Okay, moving on to 3-point perspective, which is the most aesthetically pleasing perspective like ever, because everything that you see around you is in 3-point perspective. So the world that is around you is actually in 3-point perspective, because our eyes see everything in 3 dimensions. So 3 points is 3 dimensions. Okay, 3-point perspective, as the name suggests, has 3 points. So 2 points which are connected with the horizon line, and 1 point above the horizon line or below the horizon line. So in the first example, the 3rd point is above the horizon line. So everything that you see above the horizon line appears as if it is converging to the top point. And in the second scene, the 3rd point is below the horizon line, so everything that you see is converging to the 3rd vanishing point. It is best not to add details at the start, because then it gets really confusing, and add the details in the later stages of the drawing, because the bigger shapes is what's most important at first. And of course, add some greenery to give life to the drawing or painting that you're doing, because everything man-made looks very very unnatural. Okay, now for the 4 and 5-point perspective, also known as the fisheye perspective. So as the name suggests, there are 4 points, and all those lines converge from those vanishing points as I have shown. And in the 5-point perspective, there are 5 points. The 5th point is at the center, so everything converges onto that line. And both of these perspectives form like a globe or a sphere when all these vanishing points are joined together. So whatever you draw in those 4 points, they converge onto these 4 points, thus making the objects appear as if they are distorted or they are curved. So in 5-point perspective, everything converges into that point in the center. So always remember that is the difference between 4-point and 5-point perspective. In 4-point there is no center point, and in 5-point there is the center point. Okay, now I'm creating a scene. Probably I wanted to draw a apocalyptic city or some sort with some water, and I drew a boat also, and I think it turned out pretty good. Moving on to 5-point. For the 5-point, I was thinking of what I should draw, and I had this idea of creating a farmhouse of sorts with some rice fields, and I think a church or something like that, some sort of temple or something like that, I don't know. But I think it turned out pretty good for a practice session. These studies or application of all these fundamentals help in understanding the fundamentals more and more. So it is very essential to apply rather than only study all the time. Okay, now for the isometric perspective. So there are no vanishing points and converging lines, because everything is parallel to each other, every line is parallel to each other, and the angle of these lines is actually 30 degrees, not 45 degrees. So I just replicated my room here. So everything lies in parallel to each other. This is probably the easiest one out there, and this is mainly used in architecture to lay out a scene, or in those isometric 3D renders, etc. This is a fun type of perspective, and I would like to, you know, draw more in this type of perspective in the future. Okay, moving on to composition. Composition along with perspective is another very important fundamental of drawing backgrounds or environments, because the way you compose a scene speaks a lot about what you are going to portray in that scene. So what exactly is composition? Composition in art refers to the arrangement of various visual elements in an artwork. These visual elements can be combined and placed in certain ways to create a specific composition. Composition is a means for an artist to convey specific emotions, stories, or meaning within a singular arrangement. And thanks to Mitch Levy for providing these awesome composition examples. I'll link his stuff in the description, so be sure to check it out. Okay, so there are various different types of composition. The most famous is the rule of thirds. So as you can see, everything falls in that composition grade. So in the rule of thirds, the subject is either onto those 4 points or onto those 4 lines. In V-shape composition, that is actually a negative space composition, so that V is filled with the sky and the rest of the scene is filled with all these buildings and everything else. So composition is very easy. You just have to follow the guidelines or these composition grids. Moving on to having some actual real life composition examples with photography. The first one is a rule of thirds composition, and the subject lies exactly on that 1 point. The second one is a golden section. The third one is a golden spiral. The fourth one is a converging line or a simple 1 point perspective, which is also a type of composition. And the last one is a spiral, which is probably my favorite. I have yet to do a painting or drawing with a spiral composition, but I like that composition very much because it creates a sense of drama in the scene. Okay, now for some extra tips while drawing in perspective. Okay, so objects appear less detailed as they move farther away from you, as we have discussed in the atmospheric perspective section. And if there are lines present, they move closer to each other as it goes away from your view. Okay, try to draw simple shapes and objects without perspective guidelines, because they will really help you to distort perspective in your own way and not make your drawings look stiff. Okay, so the next one would be related to lens distortion and lens warping. So objects warp as they get closer to the edges of the scene. So as you can see, the cube is warped and even the circle is warped, rather the sphere is warped because it is closer to the camera, thus creating that lens distortion. Okay, the fourth tip would be to draw characters in perspective. The most important tip is to simplify the characters or the parts of the character or the parts of the human body into simple shapes. So her legs are like cylinders, her body is like a cube, the arms are like cylinders, the head is a sphere. So try to simplify everything that you see in the human body into simple shapes, and then it will become really easy for you to draw in perspective. Okay, now for some reference breakdowns, or rather real life reference breakdowns. So you can either use Google Earth or just get some images from Google. So the first one is a simple 1 point perspective, so try to break it down with that 1 point perspective grid, and try to also get the composition right if you can. The second one is kind of like a 2 point perspective, or rather 3 point perspective, but it appears as if it's an isometric perspective. As you can see, every building is not converging to those two vanishing points. So some buildings are in their own perspective with their own vanishing points, so it happens a lot in real life. Okay, so the third one is probably the easiest. It is in 3 point perspective with one vanishing point at the top right, the second one at the far right outside of the canvas, and the third one below outside of the canvas as usual. The fourth one is very exciting because the third vanishing point is actually on the canvas and it is almost like a top-down view, and the upper two vanishing points are away outside of the canvas. So it is very essential to break this down because these really help you in understanding perspective. Actually, Ethan Becker did a really good video on this and how to draw perspective of backgrounds. So I'll link his video in the description, so be sure to check it out. Okay, now for some actual practice and applying what we have learned so far. So I had some of these ideas in mind, so I jotted them down on the paper because it helps clear my mind and decide which one to finalize in the final painting. So I went on with the V-type composition because I wanted to have some sort of wide angle perspective to have more drama in the scene. So it's a 1-point perspective and it has a V composition, which I mentioned earlier, and so the camera is looking at that character or the scene from below. You gotta think about all of these things while designing the environment, because then if you design that environment without planning, then it falls apart onto you. I did have a lot of references with me, and so I wanted to create this forest area where the character is running from some bug Pokemon. And as I mentioned before, it is always better to break the perspectives so that it doesn't look too perfect or too symmetrical. So what I did here was I angled those trees purposely not in the lines of perspective, so that gives it a feeling of being more natural rather than more man-made or more stiff. So always keep that in mind. And it is also necessary to have some natural strokes rather than keeping all these strokes perfect, or like when you draw with a ruler. So even when drawing a hard surface or straight lines, better to not draw with them with a ruler rather than doing them freehand, because that shows the imperfection or the breakage of stiffness that is necessary in the drawing. I just drew some backgrounds and trees to go along with them, and I did not cover the sky with all trees because I wanted the sky to show off some. And I really like these stepping rocks or these small cliffs, so I added them and have some more vegetation like mushrooms, grass, and these vines that are coming down from the tree. So I guess this was a really fun exercise, and I urge you to take multiple references and then take something from one reference and take another thing from another reference and then mash it together with your own imagination, because then that becomes the original thing that you have created rather than just copying everything from everywhere else exactly like it is. I decided to add the character later on in the upcoming Pokemon time-lapse video for this illustration, so I think for a background this is pretty good. Okay, and we are done.
It's so bright. Where have you brought me?
Do not be afraid, my child. This is the real world. Your eyes will take time to adjust, as you have been inside for too long.
Okay, I can see it now. I'm alright. I can see everything. It's so beautiful. I've never seen anything like this before. Oh my god.
How do you feel now, child?
Oh my god, this feels so refreshing. I think I'm going to live here for the rest of my life.
I think he will wake up after 3 days now. He outdid himself. Now it is time for you to outdo yourself.
By the way, I cut my hair. So, it's like too short and I look like an idiot. But I guess it will grow up in some time. So,